It all started with a prophecy, a terrifying warning delivered to a paranoid king. Beware the man with one sandal. For years, King Pelias of Iolcos lived in the shadow of those words. He had stolen his throne, murdering and imprisoning his own family to seize power, and he knew his crown rested on a knife's edge. He scanned every face in his court, every visitor to his city, checking their feet before their eyes. He saw assassins in every shadow, a traitor in every friend. The fear didn't just haunt him, it consumed him. Then one day the man from the prophecy arrived. A stranger, tall and powerful, walked into the city square. He had come to attend a public sacrifice Pelias was holding, an attempt to appease the gods he had so grievously offended. The crowd parted and the king's gaze fell, as it always did, to the man's feet. One was bare, covered in mud. The other wore a single, worn leather sandal. The blood drained from the king's face. This was it. This was the man who would be his undoing. The stranger's name was Jason, and he had come not for war, but to claim what was rightfully his. He was the son of the king Pelias had overthrown, and in that moment, a plan of venomous genius formed in the usurper's mind. He couldn't just kill the boy. That would make him a martyr and incite a rebellion. No, he had to orchestrate a death so spectacular, so impossible, that it would look like an act of the gods themselves. He needed to send Jason on a quest from which no man could ever return. He needed to send him for the Golden Fleece. But what was this fleece? And why was it so valuable that it could be used as the ultimate death sentence? The answer isn't a simple treasure map. It's a story of betrayal, divine intervention, and a desperate escape. It begins with two royal children, a prince named Phrixus and a princess named Helle. Their lives were a fairy tale until their mother, the queen, was cast aside for a new wife, a sorceress named Ino. Ino was a master of political theater and dark manipulation. She despised her stepchildren and saw them as obstacles to her own bloodline inheriting the throne. So she engineered a catastrophe. Secretly, she had the kingdom's seed corn roasted until it was sterile. When the farmers planted it, nothing grew. The fields lay barren, and the specter of famine loomed over the land. Ino, feigning piety, convinced the desperate king to send messengers to the oracle at Delphi to ask the gods for a solution. But she had already bribed the messengers. They returned with a horrifying fabricated prophecy. The only way to end the famine and restore the harvest was to sacrifice the king's own children, Phrixus and Helle, on the altar of Zeus. The king was devastated, but the will of the gods, and the pressure of a starving populace, was absolute. The children were dressed in sacrificial robes and led to the altar. The priests sharpened their knives. But just as the first blow was about to fall, the sky cracked open. Descending from the clouds was a creature of pure myth. A magnificent ram with a fleece not of wool, but of pure shimmering gold. It was a savior sent by their birth mother, who had prayed to the heavens for their rescue. The ram spoke to the children, telling them to climb onto its back. It leaped into the air, carrying them away from their would-be executioners, flying east over the sea, toward the rising sun. But the journey was long and perilous. As they crossed the narrow strait of water separating Europe from Asia, Princess Helle, exhausted and dizzy, lost her grip. She fell from the sky, her screams swallowed by the churning waves below. To this day, that body of water is known as the Hellespont, the Sea of Helle, a permanent monument to her tragic death. Her brother Phrixus could only watch in horror, clinging to the golden ram with all his might, his heart broken. He flew on, alone, until the ram finally set him down in the distant barbarian land of Colchis, at the very edge of the known world. The king of Colchis, Eets, a son of the sun god Helios, was in awe of the boy who arrived on a golden, flying ram. He welcomed Phrixus, treating him like a son. In gratitude to the gods for his salvation, Phrixus sacrificed the ram and presented its incredible golden fleece to King Eets. The king, recognizing its divine power and immense value, took it as the ultimate symbol of his own legitimacy and kingship. He had it nailed to a sacred oak tree in a grove dedicated to the god of war, Ares. And to ensure no one would ever steal this celestial treasure, he placed a guardian before it. The sleepless dragon, a monstrous serpent that never closed its eyes, its coils wrapped around the tree, its fangs dripping with venom. There the fleece remained, a myth, a legend, a treasure so well guarded that to even attempt to steal it was to choose your own death. This was the prize King Peleus demanded of Jason. He masked the assassination attempt with a thin veil of patriotism and glory. "Go to Colchis," he challenged the young hero in front of the entire court. "Bring back the Golden Fleece, the long-lost relic of our people. Avenge the death of Phrixus and restore our nation's honor. Do this," the king proclaimed with a wicked smile, "and I will gladly give you my crown and my kingdom." It was a perfect trap. If Jason refused, he would be branded a coward, his claim to the throne instantly nullified. If he accepted, he would sail to the edge of the world to be devoured by a dragon. Peleus leaned back on his stolen throne, certain he had won. But he had dangerously underestimated the man with one sandal. Jason was not raised in a palace. After his father was overthrown, he was smuggled out of the city as an infant and given to the wisest creature in all of ancient Greece, the centaur Chiron. For years, Jason was trained not as a prince, but as a survivor. Chiron, the legendary mentor of heroes, taught him combat, medicine, music, and strategy. He learned to hunt in the wild mountains, to read the stars, and to lead. He was forged in the wilderness, not coddled in a court. And as he stood before the man who had stolen his life, he felt not fear, but a surge of destiny. He knew this was a suicide mission. He knew Peleus wanted him dead, and he accepted the challenge anyway, because Jason had a plan of his own, a plan so audacious it had never been conceived before. He knew he could not do this alone. No single man could sail to Colchis, bypass a king who was the son of a god, and defeat a sleepless dragon. But a team could. A team of the greatest human beings alive. So Jason sent out a call. A herald was dispatched to every corner of Greece, carrying not a declaration of war, but an invitation to glory. He was building a crew for the most daring voyage in history. He wasn't just looking for sailors, he was recruiting legends. And the legends answered. From all across the Hellenic world, the heroes of the age began to gather. Hercules, the son of Zeus, the strongest man who ever lived, a demigod whose labors were already whispered in awe. Orpheus, the master musician, whose lyre could charm wild beasts, move trees, and even make rivers change their course. The twin warriors Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, one a master horseman, the other an unbeatable boxer. There was Atalanta, the fierce huntress, faster than any man and deadlier with a bow. There were princes, seers, and kings, each a hero in their own right, each drawn by the sheer, impossible gravity of the quest. They were to be called the Argonauts, named after their ship, the Argo, a vessel said to be blessed by the gods themselves. They were the original super team, an ancient league of justice, and their mission was the ultimate heist: to steal back a piece of heaven from the clutches of a monster at the very edge of the world. But who were these men? And in some tellings, one woman who would answer this impossible call. This wasn't a job for farmers or merchants. This was a call for the greatest generation of heroes the world had ever known. A roll call of legends. The word went out across all of Greece, carried on the winds, whispered in the courts of kings and the training grounds of warriors. A suicidal mission to the end of the earth for a prize beyond imagining. And they came. From every corner of the Hellenic world, they flocked to the port of Iolcus, drawn by the promise of immortal glory. Each one was a headline act in their own right. Think of it. The son of the north wind who could fly, a seer who could read the future in the flight of a bird, a helmsman so skilled he could navigate by the stars as if they were a map drawn in his own hand. And then there were the headliners, the heavy hitters. First, the man who needed no introduction, a man whose name was already a legend whispered in awe and fear. Hercules, the son of Zeus himself, a walking, talking natural disaster. He wasn't just strong, he was strength personified. He could wrestle lions, reroute rivers, and hold up the sky. Why was he here? Because for Hercules, a quiet life was a fate worse than death. His entire existence was a search for a challenge great enough to test his divine power, a quest for redemption from his own dark past. For him, a voyage into the unknown against a sleepless dragon was just another Tuesday. Then there was Orpheus, the son of a muse. His weapon wasn't a sword or a spear, it was a lyre. But don't let that fool you. When Orpheus played, the world stopped to listen. His music could charm wild beasts, make trees and rocks dance, and even soothe the savage heart of the underworld. In a crew of bronze and muscle, Orpheus was the secret weapon, the one whose power defied all logic. He could solve problems that 1,000 swords could not. He was the soul of the Argo. And you had the twins Castor and Pollux the Dioscuri. Also sons of Zeus, they were inseparable. A perfect fighting unit. Castor, the greatest horseman in the world. Pollux, an undefeated boxer whose fists could shatter stone. They were the celebrity heroes, handsome, daring, and divine. They joined not for redemption, but for the sheer thrill of it, the ultimate adventure to share with their brother. And we can't forget Atalanta of Arcadia. In a world dominated by men, she was an exception carved from granite. A huntress raised by bears, she was faster than any man. A peerless archer who had sworn off marriage to live a life of adventure. Her presence on the Argo was a statement. True heroism knows no gender. She wasn't there as a prize or a passenger. She was there as an equal, a lethal warrior whose skill would be crucial to their survival. 50 heroes in all. 50 demigods, princes, and adventurers, each with a story, each with a skill. They were the best of the best. And as they stood on the shores of Iolcus, before the magnificent Argo, a crowd of thousands gathered to see them off. The air was thick with the smoke of sacrifices and the murmur of prayers to the gods. This wasn't just a ship leaving a port. It was the hope of a nation setting sail into myth. Jason, standing at the prow, raised a golden cup and poured a libation into the sea, praying to Zeus for a swift journey, to Poseidon for calm waters, and to Hera, his secret patron, for guidance. He looked at the faces of his crew, Hercules stoic and massive, Orpheus calm and ethereal, the eager grins of the twins. He felt the weight of their lives, their hopes on his shoulders. He was no king, not yet. He was just a young man with a stolen birthright and a death sentence for a quest. But in that moment, as the 50 oars of the Argo dipped into the water in perfect unison, he was their leader. The Argonauts had set sail. Their first leg of the journey took them across the Aegean. The Argo, its magical beam of oak whispering prophecies of the dangers ahead, cut through the waves like a divine spear. For days, the journey was deceptively peaceful. The heroes trained, they told stories of their past deeds, and they began to forge the bonds that would see them through the trials to come. But the calm was never meant to last. Their first port of call was an island named Lemnos. From a distance, it looked like a paradise, lush green with inviting shores. But as they drew closer, an eerie silence settled over the ship. There were no men working the fields, no fishermen on the shores, no male voices carrying on the wind. The only inhabitants, they soon discovered, were women. And these women had a dark secret. Just a year earlier, the women of Lemnos, in a fit of rage and divine madness sent by the goddess Aphrodite, had committed an unthinkable act. They had risen up in a single night and murdered every man on the island. Their husbands, their fathers, their sons. Every last one. The island was now an Amazonian kingdom, ruled by their queen Hypsipyle. When the Argo, a ship full of the most formidable men in the world, appeared on the horizon, the women of Lemnos panicked. They armed themselves and ran to the coast, ready to defend their blood-soaked home. But when they saw the heroes, noble, handsome, godlike in their appearance, Queen Hypsipyle had a different idea. Her island needed a new generation. It needed men. Instead of a battle, the Argonauts were met with a welcome. They were invited into the city, treated to feasts, given fine clothes, and offered the best of everything the island had. The warrior women put down their spears and opened their arms. And the heroes, after weeks at sea, were all too willing to accept. The quest was forgotten. The Golden Fleece seemed a distant dream. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. The greatest heroes of Greece were lost in a comfortable paradise, forgetting their purpose, their oath, their destiny. Jason himself fell for the queen, Hypsipyle, and for a time, he was content to be the only king on an island of women. The epic quest was on the verge of fizzling out in a haze of wine and luxury. The ultimate heist team had been taken down not by a monster, but by comfort. But one man was not seduced. One man remembered the mission: Hercules. He had stayed with the ship, refusing the temptations of the city. He watched his comrades grow soft, their muscles losing their edge, their minds losing their focus. He saw the fire of adventure in their eyes being replaced by a dull, satisfied glow. And he grew angry. This wasn't the path to glory. This wasn't redemption. This was a trap, as dangerous as any monster's lair. One evening, he strode into the city square where the heroes were feasting and carousing. He didn't shout. He didn't draw his sword. He just stood there, a mountain of disappointed muscle and divine purpose. And he spoke. He reminded them of who they were. Argonauts. Heroes. He spoke of the fleece, of the glory that awaited them, of the oath they had sworn. He asked them if this was how their story was going to end. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, forgotten on a lonely island, their legend drowned in a cup of wine. His words cut through the fog of their contentment like a lightning bolt. Shame washed over the heroes. They looked at their hands, hands meant to slay monsters and pull oars, and saw them softened by idleness. They looked at each other and saw the reflection of their own weakness. Jason, looking at his queen, knew Hercules was right. Their destiny was not here. The spell was broken. The next morning, a somber and rededicated crew of Argonauts returned to the Argo. They said their goodbyes to the women of Lemnos, some leaving behind children they would never know. As they pushed off from the shore, they didn't look back. They had faced their first great trial. It hadn't been a beast with claws and fangs, but a subtle temptation, a siren song of ease and comfort. They had learned a valuable lesson. The most dangerous monsters are often the ones that promise you everything you desire. With their resolve hardened, they rode on, into the treacherous waters of the Hellespont. They had survived paradise. But as the shores of Lemnos faded into the mist behind them, they sailed toward a land of nightmares, a place ruled by a king who had a truly monstrous welcome planned for any strangers who dared to land on his shores. Their next stop would not greet them with open arms, but with the crushing grip of six arms, six monstrous granite fists that had tried to tear their ship, their quest, and their very lives apart. But the grip the Argonauts now faced belonged to just one man. And sometimes one man is far more terrifying than any monster. They made landfall in Bithynia, a lush green shore that seemed, for a moment, like a paradise. The air was warm, the water was clear. But a shadow fell over this paradise, a shadow cast by its king. Amycus, son of the sea god Poseidon. He wasn't a king who ruled from a throne. He ruled from a blood-soaked ring of sand. Amycus was a giant of a man, with a neck as thick as an oak tree and fists like boulders. And he had a law, a simple, brutal law. Any stranger who landed on his shores had to face him in a boxing match. He didn't fight for sport or for glory. He fought to kill. For years, sailors and travelers had washed up on his coast, and for years, their skulls had been used to decorate his palace. He was undefeated. He was a butcher. As the Argonauts beached the Argo, Amycus and his people, the Bebrycians, came down to meet them. There was no welcome, no offer of food or drink. There was only the challenge. Amycus, sneering, pointed a thumb at his own chest. "One of you," his voice boomed like rocks grinding together, "will fight me. It is the law. Who has the courage to die today?" The Argonauts looked at each other. They were heroes, warriors, the best of their generation. But this was different. This wasn't a battle of swords and spears. This was a primal, personal contest of brute force. And the man issuing the challenge was a demigod of destruction. Jason felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was his command, his responsibility. But before he could even speak, a figure stepped forward, calm and composed. It was Polydeuces, brother of the warrior Castor, twin brother to Helen of Troy herself. And like his father, the mighty Zeus, he was no stranger to a fight. But Polydeuces wasn't a wild brawler. He was something more. He was a technician. A master. Where others saw a brawl, he saw angles, timing, and weakness. He looked at the giant Amycus not with fear, but with the cool, analytical gaze of a craftsman sizing up a block of stone he was about to carve. "I accept your challenge," Polydeuces said, his voice steady. A cruel grin spread across Amycus's face. The contest was set. The Argonauts and the Bebrycians formed a circle on the beach. This wasn't going to be a fight with soft leather gloves. They brought out the cestus. These were brutal weapons. Thick straps of rawhide, wrapped tight around the fists and forearms, studded with cruel lumps of metal and sharpened bone. A single punch could shatter a jaw, tear flesh, and crush a skull. This was a death match. Amycus roared as he strapped on his cestus, flexing his enormous biceps. He was a mountain of muscle and rage. Polydeuces, by comparison, looked almost slender, but his body was a coil of lean, dense power. He moved with a liquid grace, a boxer's rhythm already in his feet as he prepared. The fight began. Amycus charged forward like a bull, a whirlwind of haymakers meant to end the fight in seconds. He swung with the force of a tidal wave, each punch whistling through the air with enough power to fell a tree. But he was swinging at a ghost. Polydeuces was a phantom. He danced, he weaved, he ducked. He used the giant's own momentum against him, letting the wild punches fly past his ear. He wasn't running. He was analyzing, learning the rhythm of the beast. The Bebrycians jeered, calling him a coward. The Argonauts held their breath. Polydeuces ignored it all. He was in his element. He darted in, quick as a striking snake, and landed a sharp, stinging jab on the giant's nose. A spray of blood erupted. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was precise. It was a message. Amycus bellowed in fury and pain, swiping at him, but Polydeuces was already gone, circling, his feet light on the sand. He was a matador, and Amycus was the raging bull. Again and again, Polydeuces would slip inside the giant's reach, land 2 or 3 punishing, targeted shots, to the eye, the jaw, the ribs, and then glide away before the devastating counterattack could land. Blood began to stream down Amycus's face. A deep gash opened over his eye, half blinding him. His breathing grew ragged, his roars of rage turning into frustrated grunts. He was a sledgehammer trying to hit a fly. The more he missed, the angrier he got. The angrier he got, the sloppier he became. And that's exactly what Polydeuces was waiting for. He saw the giant tiring, saw the massive shoulders begin to slump. Amycus gathered himself for one final, desperate onslaught. He threw a colossal right hook, putting every ounce of his divine heritage into the blow. It was the punch that had killed dozens of men before. If it landed, Polydeuces' head would have been torn from his shoulders. But it didn't land. Polydeuces ducked under the swinging arm with breathtaking speed. In that one moment, the giant was completely exposed. Off balance, overextended, his entire left side open. Polydeuces pivoted on his back foot, putting the full force of his body, the full power of Zeus, into a single perfect punch. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a masterpiece of violence. A rising hook that traveled less than a foot but carried the weight of destiny. The cestus connected with Amycus's temple. The sound wasn't a thud. It was a sickening crack, a sound like a heavy stone splitting apart. For a heartbeat, the giant king stood frozen, his one good eye wide with shock and disbelief. The sneer was gone. The fury was gone. There was just nothing. And then, like a great statue toppling from its pedestal, he crashed to the ground, shaking the very beach. He was dead before he hit the sand. Silence. A stunned, absolute silence. The Argonauts stared, mouths agape. The Bebrycians looked at the fallen body of their invincible king, their god-killer, and their shock curdled into pure rage. With a collective war cry, they charged. They drew clubs and knives, swarming the Argonauts, determined to avenge their fallen king. But the Argonauts were not just one champion. They were a team, a brotherhood forged in adventure. Jason drew his sword, his voice ringing out. For the Argo. Castor, Polydeuces' twin, fought with a demon's fury to protect his exhausted brother. Hercules, who had watched the duel with a grim smile, now waded into the fray like a force of nature, his massive club a blur of splintering wood and bone. The brawl on the beach was short, chaotic, and utterly one-sided. The Bebrycians were fierce, but the Argonauts were legends. They fought as one, a disciplined unit against a leaderless mob. They drove the attackers back into the woods, leaving them broken and scattered. Victory, hard-won and bloody. They tended to their wounds, Polydeuces nursing his bruised and torn knuckles. They took what supplies they needed from the now kingless settlement and returned to the Argo. They were not just sailors anymore. They were giant slayers and kingbreakers. Each trial was hardening them, melting them down and reforging them into something stronger. They pushed the Argo back into the sea, the salty wind a welcome relief. They had faced a monster of a man and won. But the sea holds more than one kind of monster, and fate holds more than one kind of trial. As they sailed on, they came to the coast of Thrace, a grim, foreboding land. There, on a desolate cliffside, stood the home of a man named Phineus. Phineus was a king and a seer, a man who had been blessed or cursed by the god Apollo with the gift of prophecy. He could see the future, untangle the threads of destiny. He knew the path to the Golden Fleece. He knew all the dangers that lay ahead. He was the key to their entire quest. But the gods are jealous. For revealing their secrets, they had punished Phineus with a fate worse than death. They had blinded him and cursed him to a life of eternal torment. For whenever food was set before the blind, starving king, a plague would descend from the sky. Winged, shrieking creatures with the faces of women and the bodies of vultures. Monsters born of filth and storm winds. The Harpies. The Argonauts needed the seer's knowledge to survive. But to get it, they would first have to save him. They would have to face the unfaceable, and fight a storm of hunger and despair sent from the heavens themselves. The two figures who stepped forward were not the brawniest of the Argonauts. They were not Hercules with his impossible strength or Polydeuces, the boxer who could shatter stone. They were Zets and Calais, sons of Boreas, the god of the north wind. And as they drew their swords, a faint shimmer on their backs hinted at the divine power flowing through their veins. They were the only ones who could meet a storm in the sky and fight it on its own terms. The Argonauts laid a trap. A feast, the likes of which the tormented King Phineus had not seen in years, was spread before him. Roasted meats, fresh bread, bowls of olives and figs. The aroma was an act of hope in a place that had long forgotten it. Phineus, trembling with a hunger so profound it was a physical agony, reached a skeletal hand toward the food. And then they came. They didn't fly so much as plummet from the sky, two streaks of filth and fury. They were the Harpies. Part woman, part vulture. Their faces were those of withered crones, twisted in a permanent sneer of malice. Their bodies were emaciated, covered in greasy, molting feathers, and their talons were long and cruelly curved, caked with the grime of 1,000 stolen meals. They screamed as they descended, a sound like metal grinding on bone, a shriek that curdled the air. In a whirlwind of chaotic motion, they fell upon the feast. They didn't just eat. They were a force of pure violation. They snatched the meat from the king's very fingers, their claws raking his skin. They tore at the bread, scattering crumbs. And what they did not take, they defiled, leaving behind a stench so foul, so utterly inhuman, that it clung to the very stones of the palace. It was the smell of divine retribution, a pestilence that made the Argonauts gag and their eyes water. In a heartbeat they were gone, soaring back into the clouds, their mocking laughter echoing down. Phineus was left sobbing, his face buried in his hands, the pathetic remnants of the feast now utterly inedible, a monument to his curse. But this time was different. As the Harpies wheeled in the sky, preparing to vanish, two new shapes rocketed from the ground to meet them. Zets and Calais, the sons of the north wind, had unfurled their wings. Great, powerful wings of bronze and white feathers that beat the air with the force of their father's gales. They surged upwards, swords gleaming in the sun, a sight so impossible it stunned their fellow Argonauts into silence. A chase began across the heavens. The Harpies were fast, empowered by the wrath of Zeus himself. They darted and weaved, shrieking in a mixture of terror and rage. They were spirits of the storm, but they were being hunted by the storm's own children. Zets and Calais were relentless. The blood of a god gave them limitless stamina, their wings carving through the air, closing the distance with every powerful stroke. They flew past the coast of Thrace, over the sea, a desperate high-stakes ballet of predator and prey. Finally, they cornered them over the floating islands. The Harpies, exhausted and terrified, dove for sanctuary. The winged brothers were right behind them, swords raised, ready to deliver the killing blow and end the curse forever. They were about to spill divine blood, an act that could have unknown, catastrophic consequences. But just as their blades began to fall, the air itself shimmered. A figure appeared between them and their quarry, a being made of pure light and color. It was Iris, the messenger of the gods, her own wings beating with the gentle hues of the rainbow. She was the Harpies' sister, and she had come to intervene. She raised a hand, and her voice was not a command, but a statement of absolute authority that could not be disobeyed. She promised them on the sacred waters of the river Styx, an oath that not even Zeus could break, that if the brothers spared the Harpies, they would never again trouble the blind King Phineus. They would be confined to a cave on Crete for all time. Zets and Calais lowered their swords. They had not come for vengeance, but for a solution. An unbreakable oath from the gods was better than a pair of divine corpses, and the potential for eternal damnation. The deal was struck. The Harpies vanished into their new prison, and the sons of the north wind returned to their ship, victorious. Back at the palace, Phineus wept with gratitude as he ate his first full meal in living memory. The food tasted of freedom, and in return for this incredible gift, He gave the Argonauts the one thing they needed more than gold or glory: knowledge. Prophecy. He was a seer after all. His blindness was the price for seeing the future too clearly, and he now laid that future bare for Jason. He warned them of the perils ahead, the strange peoples they would meet, the dangers they would face. But one warning stood above all others, a challenge so monumental it seemed less like an obstacle and more like the end of the world. He told them of the Symplegades, the clashing rocks. Imagine two colossal, sheer cliffs, two living mountains of stone that guarded a narrow strait of water. These rocks were not fixed. They were alive, possessed by a violent, relentless spirit. They floated on the churning sea, constantly moving, shrouded in a thick, briny mist. And at unpredictable intervals, driven by the furious winds, they would smash together with inconceivable force, grinding to dust anything, ship, whale, or god, caught between them. The spray from their impact would reach the heavens, and the sound would be like the sky itself cracking in two. No ship had ever passed through them. To even attempt it was suicide. The Argonauts looked at each other, the joy of their recent victory turning to ash in their mouths. They had beaten a monster of the sky, but how could they possibly beat the earth itself? How could a ship made of wood and bronze survive a collision that could shatter mountains? Phineus, sensing their despair, offered them a sliver of hope, a strange, cryptic piece of advice. He told Jason that before he risked the Argo and the lives of all his men, he must first release a dove. He was to stand at the mouth of the strait and let the bird fly through. If the dove passes through safely, the old king whispered, his voice raspy, then row with all your might and follow. The gods will grant you a path. But if the rocks crush that dove, then your quest is a failure. Turn back, for it is not your destiny to pass. To try would be to choose your own grave. And so the heroes' next great test was set. Their lives, their quest, the fate of the Golden Fleece. It all now rested on the wings of a single fragile bird, and a gateway that was quite literally designed to crush them into nothing. The path to Colchis was blocked by the jaws of the world, and they were about to sail right into them. The Argo slid forward, a wooden spear aimed at the throat of the world. Before them, the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, stood as two colossal, jagged teeth in the mouth of the sea. They weren't just stone. They felt alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy, their surfaces slick with the foam of countless crushed waves and the memory of splintered ships. The air was thick with a low, grinding hum, the sound of mountains holding their breath, waiting to exhale destruction. Every man on board was frozen, their knuckles white on their oars. This wasn't a storm they could navigate or a monster they could fight. This was geology as a predator. Jason stood at the prow, the cage holding the dove feeling impossibly fragile in his hands. This was Phineus's final, desperate piece of advice, a prophecy tied to the fate of a bird. He opened the latch. For a moment, the dove simply stood there, a small white emblem of peace in a place of pure violence. Then, with a frantic beat of its wings, it shot forward, a streak of white against the dark, angry stone. The Argonauts watched, their own lives tethered to its flight. The dove flew straight and true directly into the gap. And then it happened. The world roared. The two mountains lunged at each other with an impossible speed, a blur of granite and spray. The sound was a physical blow, a cataclysmic boom that shook the Argo to its core and sent a shockwave across the water. For a heart-stopping second, the gap was gone, replaced by a wall of stone grinding against stone. Then, as the prophecy foretold, the rocks began to recoil. As the gap reopened, Jason squinted, his heart hammering against his ribs. There, on the other side, flying a little unsteadily, was the dove. It was alive, but its tail feathers, they were gone, sheared clean off by the razor edge of the world. That was their window, an inch of space, a fraction of a second, bought by a bird's sacrifice. Row! The word was torn from Jason's throat, a raw command that broke the spell of terror. Row for your lives. And they rowed. Oh, how they rowed! Typhus, the helmsman, steered them into the churning chaos of the passage, his face a mask of concentration. The heroes pulled with a strength born of pure primal fear. The grinding of the rocks was deafening now, the sound of the universe being torn apart right next to their ears. A massive wave, born from the rock's retreat, crashed over the deck, threatening to swamp them. But the goddess Athena, watching over her chosen heroes, placed one immortal hand on the stern of the ship and gave it a mighty shove forward. They were halfway through when the rocks began to close again. They could feel the pressure changing, the air itself seeming to compress. The shadow of the converging mountains fell over them, a promise of instant annihilation. They could see the striations in the rock, the raw scraped surfaces just feet from the hull. Another inch, another moment, and the Argo would be nothing but a memory ground into dust. But with one final synchronized lung-bursting pull, they shot out of the gap. Behind them, the Symplegades slammed shut with a thunderous finality, the impact sending a plume of water hundreds of feet into the air. They had done it. They had passed through the jaws of death, and as the prophecy had decreed, having been conquered by a mortal ship, the clashing rocks became fixed, rooted to the spot for all time. They were the first and the last to ever make the passage. They had entered a new world. The waters of the Euxine Sea, what we now call the Black Sea, were dark and unknown. The Argonauts, gasping for air, drenched and shaking, felt a strange mix of triumph and dread. They had survived the unsurvivable, but they were now sailing into a realm of myth and legend from which few ever returned. Their journey continued along the coast, and soon they came to a sight that made even these hardened heroes pause. It was the land of the Amazons, the warrior women who lived without men. They saw the city of Themyscira, its formidable walls built not just for defense, but as a declaration of power. On the plains they could see them, women on horseback, drilling with spears and bows, their movements sharp, precise, and deadly. An entire nation of fighters who had perfected the art of war. A debate broke out on the Argo. Some, like the mighty Peleus, father of the future Achilles, urged for a show of force, to land and prove their strength. But Jason, ever the diplomat, knew this was a distraction they could not afford. Their quest was for the fleece, not for glory in a pointless battle against a warrior race. A strong wind sent by Hera blew favorably, pushing them onward. Jason made the call to sail on, to leave the Amazons and their territory in peace. It was a sign of his maturing leadership. The goal was more important than the ego. Days later, battered by a storm, they sought refuge on a desolate island. The place had a strange, oppressive silence. The trees were black and skeletal, and the ground was littered with sharp, metallic-looking objects. This was the island of Ares, the god of war. And they were not alone. A sudden shriek from above made them look up. The sky was blotted out by a swarm of creatures, birds with feathers of bronze sharp as daggers. These were the Stymphalian birds, the same monsters Hercules had once driven from Greece. The birds dove, and it began to rain razors. Their bronze feathers rained down, embedding themselves in the deck, slicing through rigging, and forcing the Argonauts to raise their shields. This wasn't a fight they could win with swords. But Jason remembered more of Phineus's advice. He ordered the men to put on their helmets and then, in unison, to beat their swords against their shields, creating a deafening rhythmic clangor. They shouted, they roared, they created a symphony of terrifying noise. The birds, with their sensitive hearing, couldn't stand the coordinated chaos. They shrieked in distress, their attack patterns broke, and they fled the island in a great dark cloud. As the noise faded and the last of the metallic feathers clattered to the ground, they heard a new sound. The sound of weak voices calling out from the thicket. Cautiously, the Argonauts moved inland and found 4 young men, shipwrecked, starving, and clothed in rags. They were terrified, huddling together against the strange, armed men who had just appeared on their island prison. Jason offered them food and water, assuring them they meant no harm. He asked who they were and how they came to be here. The eldest spoke, his voice hoarse. He said his name was Argus. He and his brothers were sailing from Colchis, their homeland, on a journey to Greece to claim the inheritance of their father. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He asked the name of their father. The young man looked at him, confused. Our father was Phrixus, he said. A stunned silence fell over the Argonauts. Phrixus, the man who had flown to Colchis on the back of the golden ram. The man whose sacrifice had created the Golden Fleece. These weren't just any castaways. They were the sons of Phrixus, the grandsons of King Aetes himself. It was a stroke of luck so profound it could only be the work of the gods. Here, on this forsaken island in the middle of nowhere, they had found the key. They had found men who knew the layout of Colchis, who knew the currents of the river Phasis, and who knew the mind of their grandfather, the formidable king who held the fleece. With their new allies on board, the Argonauts' morale soared. The quest no longer felt like a blind stab in the dark. They had inside knowledge. They had a plan. With the guidance of Argus and his brothers, the Argo finally found the mouth of the river Phasis, the great waterway that led to the heart of Colchis. As they sailed inland, the landscape changed. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of strange herbs and ancient magic. The banks of the river were lined with dark, imposing trees, and eerie totems hung from their branches. This was the edge of the known world, a kingdom ruled by a son of the sun god, Helios. It felt less like a country and more like a spell, woven from shadow and power. Finally, through the mist they saw it. The city of Aea, the capital of Colchis. It rose from the earth, a fortress of dark stone and gleaming bronze, formidable and utterly alien. This was it, the end of the line, the goal they had bled for, fought for, and sailed across the world to reach. Jason stood at the prow, the salty wind of the Euxine Sea at his back, the strange, magical air of Colchis on his face. He had his crew, he had his ship, and now he had the grandsons of the king. He felt a surge of confidence. They had cheated death, they had navigated the impossible, and they had finally arrived. But as they moored the Argo and prepared to step onto the soil of Colchis, they were blissfully unaware of the true nature of the game they were about to play. They weren't just walking into a kingdom to ask for a prize. They were walking into a trap, set by a sorcerer king with a heart of stone, and the only path to survival lay in the hands of the king's own daughter, a powerful priestess who could command the dead, and whose heart was about to become the god's chosen battlefield. Her name was Medea, and in the sun-scorched, opulent palace of Colchis, she was both princess and prisoner, a priestess of the dark goddess Hecate, who understood the language of poisons and the whispers of the dead far better than the politics of her father's court. King Aetes, son of the sun god Helios, ruled Colchis with an iron fist and a paranoid heart. The Golden Fleece, nailed to a sacred oak in a grove guarded by a sleepless dragon, was more than a treasure. It was the divine charter of his kingship, a symbol of his power, and he trusted no one, especially not foreigners who arrived in a ship built by the gods, with a hero at its helm who looked a little too much like the man from the prophecy, the one sandaled man destined to usurp him. As the Argo dropped anchor in the Phasis River, the air itself seemed to grow heavy, thick with suspicion. Colchis was not Iolcus. This was the edge of the world, a place where civilization frayed into myth, and the laws of men were subject to the whims of a sorcerer king. Jason, ever bold, led a small party to the palace, his heart a drumbeat of hope and dread. He was a prince demanding what was his by right of a quest. But in the eyes of Aetes, he was a thief. The throne room was a cavern of gold and shadow. Aetes sat, his face a mask of contempt, his eyes burning with the light of his divine grandfather. He listened to Jason's plea, a story of a usurped throne, a divine quest, and a promise of glory. He heard the words, but he saw only the threat. Yet, to refuse a guest so openly, one who claimed the favor of the gods, was a dangerous game. So Aetes, a master of cruel strategy, smiled a predator's smile. He would not deny the hero his prize. No, he would allow Jason the chance to earn it. And here, the king laid out his price, a series of trials so patently impossible they were nothing more than a death sentence wrapped in the language of heroism. First, Jason must yoke the Calcatoroi, two colossal, fire-breathing bulls with hooves of sharpened bronze, forged in the furnaces of Hephaestus himself. Then with these beasts, he had to plow a vast field, the field of Ares. But he would not be sowing wheat or barley. He was to sow the teeth of a dragon, and from that unholy soil would spring an army of fully armed spectral warriors, the Spartoi, born from the earth with murder in their hearts. Jason would have to fight and defeat this phantom army, alone. If he could accomplish all of this from sunrise to sunset, then, and only then, would Aetes consider giving him the fleece. Silence fell upon the hall. The Argonauts looked at Jason, their faces pale. This wasn't a quest, it was a ritual of execution. Hercules might have managed it, but Jason was a leader of men, not a demigod of impossible strength. Despair, cold and absolute, began to settle over him. He had sailed to the end of the world only to be handed an invitation to his own funeral, but they were not alone in that throne room. Watching from the shadows was Medea, and as she looked upon the handsome, desperate prince from the west, something else was at play. A force far older and more powerful than any king's decree. High on Mount Olympus, Hera, Jason's divine protector, had watched his progress with a hawk's eye. She knew Aetes would never yield. She needed a weapon inside the walls of Colchis, an unforeseen variable. And so she had gone to the one goddess whose power could break any kingdom, shatter any loyalty. Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Hera had begged, flattered, and bribed Aphrodite to intervene. And so the goddess of love called upon her son, the mischievous and terrifyingly potent Eros. With his golden bow, Eros flew unseen into the throne room of Calchas. He drew an arrow, one dipped in a potion of pure, unquenchable obsession, and as Medea laid eyes on Jason for the first time, that arrow flew straight and true, burying itself deep in her heart. It was not a gentle awakening of affection. It was a fire, a fever, a divine madness that consumed her instantly. Every fiber of her being now screamed for this stranger's survival. Her loyalty to her father, her duty to her kingdom, her sacred vows as a priestess, all of it turned to ash in the furnace of this new God-forged love. She saw Jason's despair, and it was her own. His death would not just be a tragedy. It would be the end of her world. That night Medea did not sleep. She paced the cold stone floors of her chambers, a war raging within her. To help Jason would be the ultimate betrayal. She would be turning against her father, her people, her entire history. Eats was a cruel man, a tyrant she feared, but he was still her father. Calchas was her home. And the secrets of her magic, the dark arts taught to her by Hecate, were sacred, not to be shared with foreign invaders. But then the image of Jason would rise in her mind. His proud stance, the fear he tried to hide, the impossible doom that awaited him at dawn. The god's arrow burned in her soul, twisting her logic, making betrayal feel like destiny, making treason feel like salvation. What was a kingdom compared to this feeling? What was a father's love, which she had so rarely felt, compared to the promise of a love that could sail her away from this gilded cage forever? She was a sorceress. She knew the way. She possessed the knowledge to strip the fire from the bulls, to grant a man invincibility for a day, to turn the earth-born soldiers against themselves. She held Jason's life in the palm of her hand. All she had to do was choose. Choose the stranger she had known for a single afternoon over the family, and the world she had known her entire life. By the time the moon was high, the battle was over. Love or the divine madness that wore its mask had won. Her decision was made. She went to her chest of herbs and potions, her fingers moving with deft certainty. She gathered charms of protection, salves of fire resistance, and secrets whispered only in the darkest circles of magic. She was no longer just a princess or a priestess. She was a conspirator, a traitor. Under the cloak of a starless Colchian night, Medea slipped out of the palace, a ghost moving through the sleeping city. She made her way towards the designated meeting place, a remote shrine to Hecate, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. She was about to commit an act from which there could be no return, betting her entire existence on a hero she barely knew. She was walking into a new life or to her own death, and as she moved through the darkness, she knew that with the secret she carried, she was not just bringing Jason the means to survive the day. She was bringing him the key to stealing the Golden Fleece itself. She found him by the shrine of Hecate, a place of shadows and secrets, fitting for the treason she was about to commit. Jason saw her approach, a ghost in the moonlight, and for a moment, the hero who had faced down giants and monsters felt a tremor of true fear. This was not a battle of bronze and muscle, but of whispers and promises, a far more dangerous game. Medea didn't speak at first. She simply held out a small ornate flask carved from a single Caspian seashell. Inside was the unguent, the chrism of invulnerability, brewed from a flower that first sprang from the blood of the tortured Titan, Prometheus. Its power was unholy, a violation of the natural order. She explained its use in a low, urgent voice. He was to anoint his body, his spear, and his shield with the balm. For one day, and one day only, it would make him impervious to both fire and iron. No flame could scorch his skin, no blade could break it. He would have the strength of a god, but only until the sun set. Jason listened, his eyes locked on hers, seeing not just a princess, but a sorceress of terrifying power, a woman willing to burn down her own kingdom for a man she barely knew. But her gift came with a warning. Conquering the bulls was only the first step. After yoking them and plowing the field of Ares, he would be given a helmet full of dragon's teeth to sow in the furrows. And from that cursed soil, an army of warriors, the Spartoi, would spring forth, fully armed and intent on his destruction. She told him that to fight them was suicide. Instead, when they rose from the earth, he was to throw a large stone into their midst. Confused as to who threw it, the earth-born soldiers would turn their rage upon each other, fighting to the last man. This was her final, most crucial secret. She was giving him not just a shield but a strategy. She was handing him her father's doom. Jason took the flask, his hand brushing hers. In that single touch, a pact was sealed. An oath was sworn not to the gods but to each other. He promised her marriage, a place of honor in his homeland of Iolcus, a new life far from the tyranny of her father. And Medea, who had never known a world beyond Colchis, chose to believe him. The next morning, the sun rose over a city electric with anticipation. The entire populace of Colchis gathered at the field of Ares, a vast cursed plain dedicated to the god of war. They climbed the hills surrounding the field, their chatter a low hum of excitement and bloodlust. King Aetes arrived in a golden chariot, dressed in the regalia of war, a cruel, confident smirk on his face. He took his seat on a throne of polished stone, looking down on the lone figure of Jason as if he were an insect. The Argonauts watched from the shore, their faces grim. They had come so far, but they could not help him now. This was a trial he had to face alone. Jason stood in the center of the field, the earth hard and black beneath his feet. He had already anointed himself in secret, and he could feel the magic coursing through him, a strange, cold fire in his veins. He felt invincible. He looked up at Aetes, gave a curt nod, and the king gave a signal. A great stone gate at the far end of the field groaned open, revealing a cavernous subterranean stable, dark as a tomb. For a moment there was silence, and then a sound, a deep guttural roar that was not animal but metallic, like a forge bellowing to life. Two massive bulls, the Caucatoroi, stormed into the light. Their bodies were not flesh but solid bronze, forged in the furnaces of the god Hephaestus himself. Their hooves were bronze, their horns were bronze, and as they charged, they belched plumes of searing flame from their nostrils, turning the very air to shimmering heat. The grass in their path instantly blackened and crisped to ash. The crowd gasped. These were not beasts to be tamed. They were living engines of destruction. They thundered towards Jason, their bronze bodies gleaming under the sun, their fiery breath scorching a path straight for him. The Argonauts cried out in warning, but Jason stood his ground. He felt the wave of heat wash over him, a furnace blast that should have melted his skin from his bones. But Medea's magic held. He felt nothing but a pleasant warmth. As the first bull lowered its head to gore him, he didn't dodge. He met it head-on. He grabbed the massive bronze horns, his magically enhanced muscles straining. It was like wrestling a locomotive. The bull roared, a sound of grinding gears and rage, and blasted another jet of fire directly into his face. Jason's hair didn't even singe. The crowd fell silent, their jeers turning to stunned disbelief. King Aetes leaned forward on his throne, his smirk vanishing, replaced by a scowl of pure fury. Jason, using his supernatural strength, forced the bull's head down, twisting its neck with a groan of protesting metal. He wrestled the beast into submission, forcing the heavy wooden yoke onto its back. The second bull charged, and Jason repeated the feat, grabbing it, wrestling it, and yoking it beside its brother. He now stood behind two living blast furnaces, holding the reins of a plow attached to creatures of divine, impossible power. He cracked the reins, and the bulls, now magically subdued by the yoke, began to pull. They tore through the hard-packed soil of the field of Ares, their bronze hooves churning the earth, their fiery breath turning the ground they plowed into smoking, blackened furrows. Jason walked behind them, his feet steady, his purpose clear, carving line after line into the cursed field. It took hours, but he plowed the entire plain, a feat no mortal man could have ever accomplished. When it was done, he released the bulls and they retreated, beaten, back into their stable. An official brought him the helmet of Ares, filled to the brim with teeth. They were yellowed and ancient, each one as large as a man's thumb. They felt cold to the touch, humming with a latent, malevolent energy. Walking the furrows he had just made, Jason began to sow them, dropping them into the dark earth one by one, like a farmer planting seeds of death. As the last tooth fell, the ground began to tremble. The crowd murmured, pointing in fear. From the furrows, a hand made of bone and dirt broke the surface. Then another, and another. All across the plowed field, the earth gave birth. Fully formed warriors in bronze armor clawed their way out of the soil, their eyes glowing with a mindless, murderous light. They were the Spartoi, the sown men. They rose to their feet, shaking the dirt from their shields and spears, their numbers growing until a silent, terrible army of hundreds stood before Jason. They had no leader, no banner. Their only purpose was to kill the one who had woken them. They began to advance, a wall of bronze and death. There were too many. Even with his invulnerability, they would overwhelm him, bury him under their sheer weight. But Jason remembered Medea's words. He stooped, picked up a heavy, jagged stone, and with all his might, hurled it into the very center of the advancing army. The stone clattered off a warrior's helmet. The warrior, having no concept of physics or trajectory, simply saw his neighbor standing beside him and assumed he was the attacker. He thrust his spear into the man next to him. That man's ally retaliated, and in a heartbeat, the entire field erupted into chaos. The Spartoi, with no true allegiance, turned on each other with savage fury. They were born to fight, and with no other enemy designated, they found one in their own ranks. The clash of their swords and shields echoed across the plain. It was a horrifying spectacle of self-destruction. Jason simply stood back and watched as the Earthborn army annihilated itself, brother against brother, until only a field of shattered armor and broken bodies remained, slowly sinking back into the soil from which they came. Jason was the only one left standing. He had done it. He had completed the impossible task. A roar went up from the Argonauts on the shore, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. The people of Colchis were silent, awestruck and terrified by what they had just witnessed. Jason turned to face King Eats. He was breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer adrenaline of the day. He had faced down fire and iron. He had commanded monsters and watched an army born from the dirt destroy itself. He had proven his worth. He had won the prize. But as he looked at the king, he saw no admiration. He saw no honor. He saw only a face contorted by pure, undiluted hatred. Eats rose from his throne, his eyes burning with a rage that eclipsed even the fire of his bulls. He had been tricked. He had been humiliated in front of his own people by a foreign upstart. Jason saw it in that instant. The king had never intended to honor his word. The trials were just a spectacle, a prelude to his murder. Winning the contest hadn't secured the fleece. It had only signed his death warrant. The air, thick with the smell of scorched earth and ozone, suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. The cheers of the Colchian crowd died in Jason's ears, replaced by a low ringing. Every smile he saw in the royal box was a bared dagger. Every friendly clap on the back from a lord felt like a hand searching for a place to stick a knife. He had played their game and won, but the real game, the one for his life, had just begun. There was no path forward that didn't end with his head on a spike and the Argo burning in the harbor. As the king and his court departed, leaving Jason standing alone in the blood-soaked arena, a shadow detached itself from the palace walls. It was Medea. Her face, usually a mask of regal composure, was a storm of fear and resolve. She moved with a speed and silence that was unnerving, her eyes darting towards the guards, towards the darkening sky. She reached him, her fingers cold as she gripped his arm. Her voice was a mere whisper, a rustle of dry leaves in a graveyard. "He will not give you the fleece. Tonight, my father will hold a great feast in your honor. But the wine will be poisoned, and the guards will have new orders. You and your men will be slaughtered before the moon is high." Every word was a hammer blow, confirming the cold dread coiling in Jason's gut. He had sailed halfway across the world, faced down monsters, and plowed a field with fire-breathing bulls, all for a lie. "What can I do?" he whispered back, his own voice hoarse. "His palace is a fortress. The fleece is guarded." Medea's grip tightened, her knuckles white. "The fleece is not in the palace. It is in the sacred grove of Ares, a place forbidden to all. And it is guarded by a beast that knows no sleep, a horror born of the earth itself. A dragon." For a moment Jason's heart sank. A dragon. Of course. It was the final impossible lock on a prize he was never meant to have. But then he saw the fire in Medea's eyes. It wasn't the fire of despair. It was the fire of a sorceress. "My father cannot be defied," she said, her voice dropping even lower, filled with a terrible gravity. "But he can be betrayed. I can help you. I can lull the serpent to sleep. But you must swear an oath. Not to a king but to me. Swear on your life, on your gods, that you will take me with you, that you will make me your wife in your homeland of Iolcus. This was the true price. Not courage, not strength, but a bond. A life for a life. He looked at this princess, this witch who was willing to cast aside her kingdom, her family, her entire world for him. For a future she could only see in his eyes. In that moment, she was more terrifying and more beautiful than any monster or goddess he had ever seen. I swear it, Jason said, and the words felt more binding than any chain. I will make you my queen. A pact was sealed, not with a handshake but with a shared desperate glance. The plan was simple and insane. While the Argonauts quietly readied the ship for a swift departure, Jason and Medea would move under the cloak of the new moon. They would steal the single greatest treasure in the known world and flee before anyone was the wiser. As darkness fell over Colchis, the city lit up for the celebratory feast. The sounds of music and laughter echoed from the palace, a chilling soundtrack to their secret mission. Medea led Jason away from the lights, through winding back alleys and forgotten paths only she knew. She was a ghost in her own city, her feet making no sound on the cobblestones. She carried a small dark pouch that smelled of strange herbs and the deep earth. They soon left the city behind, entering the ancient woods that bordered the capital. The air grew cold, the trees immense and twisted, their branches like the skeletal arms of giants clawing at the stars. An unnatural silence hung in the forest. No birds, no insects, just the sound of their own breathing. This was the grove of Ares, the god of war, a place where mortals were not welcome. Deeper they went, until they saw a faint golden light filtering through the trees. It wasn't firelight. It was something else, something pure and alive. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat. As they drew closer, the light grew stronger, illuminating a clearing. And in the center of that clearing, on the lowest branch of an enormous ancient oak tree, hung the prize, the Golden Fleece. It was more magnificent than any story had ever described. It wasn't just a sheep's hide, it was woven light. It shimmered and flowed as if it were liquid gold, casting a warm, divine radiance that pushed back the forest's oppressive gloom. It seemed to hum with a quiet power, a remnant of the sacred winged ram that had once worn it. It was a piece of heaven right here on earth. But it was not unguarded. Coiled around the base of the oak tree was the dragon. It was immense, far larger than Jason could have imagined. Its scales were not green, but a patchwork of bronze, copper, and obsidian, catching the fleece's light in 1,000 deadly glints. Its head, as large as a boulder, rested on its coils, but its eyes were wide open. They were ancient reptilian slits of molten gold, and they glowed with a sleepless malice. It didn't breathe fire. It didn't need to. A low guttural rumble vibrated through the ground, a promise of a power that could shatter bone and pulverize stone. This creature had never slept, not for a single moment in the centuries it had stood guard. It was the perfect warden. Jason drew his sword, the bronze blade looking like a child's toy against the sheer scale of the beast. But Medea put a hand on his arm, shaking her head. "Force will not work here," she whispered. "This is a battle of a different kind." She stepped forward, alone, into the golden light of the clearing. The dragon's massive head lifted slowly from its coils, its unblinking eyes fixing on her. The rumbling in its chest deepened, a sound that could curdle blood. But Medea did not flinch. She began to chant. Her voice, at first a soft murmur, grew in strength, weaving a melody that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. It was a language older than Colchis, a tongue of primal forces. As she sang, she opened her pouch and sprinkled a fine powder into the air. A mixture of crushed herbs and potent essences gathered under a dark moon. She called on Hypnos, the god of sleep, and on the secret powers of the night. The air grew thick, heavy. The dragon's rumbling faltered. Its great head swayed as if confused. The golden eyes, which had never closed, began to flicker. Medea's song was a gentle poison, a magic that didn't attack the body, but seeped directly into the mind. She was singing the very concept of slumber into a creature that had never known it. It was like describing color to a man born blind. The serpent fought it. It hissed, a sound like 1,000 blades being sharpened at once, and shook its colossal head, trying to clear the magical fog from its ancient mind. But Medea's spell was relentless. Her voice wrapped around its consciousness like silken threads, pulling it down into a darkness it had never experienced. The great eyelids, heavy as shields, began to droop. The massive coils, once tight as springs, began to relax. With a final, shuddering sigh that shook the leaves on the trees, the dragon's head sank to the ground. Its golden eyes slid shut. For the first time in an age, the guardian slept. Silence. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the slumbering beast. Jason stood frozen, his sword still in his hand, utterly awestruck. He had witnessed a power far greater than any warrior's strength. Medea, her face pale with effort, nodded to him. Go. Quickly. The spell will not last forever. He moved, his feet feeling heavy as if wading through a dream. He stepped carefully over the dragon's massive coils, the heat radiating from its scales warming his skin. He reached the oak tree and stood before the fleece. He reached out a trembling hand and lifted it from the branch. It was impossibly light, yet it felt substantial, humming with a power that flowed into him, chasing away the forest chill and filling him with a warmth he'd never known. He had it. After all the trials, all the betrayals, the quest was complete. He had the Golden Fleece. He slung it over his shoulder, its divine light bathing him in a hero's glow. He turned back to Medea, a look of triumph and gratitude on his face. But her expression was not one of celebration. She was looking back towards the city, her head cocked, listening. "We have to go," she urged, her voice tight with a new fear. Now. As they plunged back into the darkness of the woods, the fleece lighting their way like a captive star, a distant sound cut through the night. It wasn't the sound of a feast. It was the sharp, angry blast of a bronze horn, echoing from the palace watchtowers. Then another answered it from the harbor. And another. Someone had discovered their escape. The entire city was waking up. The greatest heist in history was over. Now the greatest chase was about to begin. The Argo surged forward, a sliver of black against the dawning gray of the harbor. Behind them, the city of was a hive of angry hornets. Torches bloomed along the docks, swarming like fireflies, their reflections dancing on the disturbed water. Shouts carried across the waves, sharp and furious. The Argonauts rowed with a desperation they had never known. This wasn't a race for glory. This was a frantic scramble for survival. Every man pulled on his oar until his muscles screamed, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their knuckles white. The rhythmic splash and creak of the ship was the sound of their heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat against the rising anger of Calchas. Jason stood at the prow, the golden fleece a blinding beacon wrapped around his arm, its light seeming to mock the darkness. He stared back at the city, at the palace of Eats, and saw the king's own war galley, the flagship of the Colchian fleet, being prepared. Its massive sail, dyed crimson, was being unfurled. Dozens of smaller, faster ships were already cutting through the water, their bronze-tipped rams glinting. They weren't just being chased, they were being hunted. Medea was beside him, her face a mask of cold resolve, but her eyes betrayed the terror. She had betrayed her father, her people, her entire world. There was no going back. She pointed towards a complex series of river mouths that fed into the Black Sea, a delta of confusing, mist-shrouded channels. Their only hope was to lose the fleet in that maze. Typhus, the helmsman, his face grim, understood immediately. He spun the rudder, and the Argo veered sharply, plunging into the labyrinth of waterways. For hours, it was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse played out in a world of fog and reeds. The Argonauts rowed with the last of their strength, their vision blurred by sweat and exhaustion. They could hear the Colchians behind them, the rhythmic chanting of their rowers, the beat of their war drums, a constant, menacing pulse that seemed to shake the very water. Sometimes a pursuing ship would appear out of the mist, impossibly close, and a volley of arrows would hiss past their heads, thudding into the mast and deck. Hercules and the other warriors would raise their shields, firing back blindly into the fog, buying them precious seconds to pull away and vanish back into the gloom. But King Eats was relentless. He knew these waters. For every trick Typhus used, the Colchians had a counter. They began to fan out, cutting off escape routes, tightening the net. The Argonauts were being herded, pushed toward a single, wide channel that led back to the open sea. They were faster in a straight line, but the Colchian fleet was vast. Once they were in open water, they would be surrounded and overwhelmed. The hope that had burned so brightly just hours ago was flickering, threatening to be extinguished by the sheer, crushing weight of their enemy. As the fog finally burned off under the rising sun, the horrifying reality of their situation became clear. The Argo was alone in a vast expanse of water, and behind them, stretching to the horizon, was the Colchian armada. And leading the charge on the fastest ship in the fleet was a figure Medea recognized with a gasp of pure dread. It was her brother Absyrtus, young, brilliant, and the commander of her father's navy. He loved her, but he loved Colchis more. And he would not stop until he had the fleece back and his sister in chains. A cold silence fell over the Argo. The cheers of their escape were a distant memory, replaced by the grim understanding of their fate. They could row until their hearts burst, but they could not outrun an entire navy led by a man who knew their every move. Jason looked at Medea, his face etched with desperation. "Is there nothing?" he pleaded. "Is there no magic, no trick you have left?" Medea stared at her brother's approaching ship, her expression unreadable. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face. For a long moment she said nothing. The only sounds were the lapping of waves and the distant, triumphant drums of the Colchians. When she finally spoke, her voice was a dead, hollow whisper that chilled every man aboard. "There is one way," she said, not looking at Jason, but at the approaching sail of her brother's ship. "But it will cost us our souls." She explained the plan. It was a strategy born not of magic, but of a terrifying, ice-cold understanding of her father's heart. She would send a message to her brother. She would tell him that Jason had kidnapped her, that she wanted to return home with the fleece, but that the Argonauts wouldn't let her. She would ask him to meet her alone on a sacred island nearby, a place where oaths were sworn and violence was forbidden. She would promise to help him ambush Jason and recover the fleece. It was a lie, a venomous trap aimed at the one person in the world she should have protected. Absyrtus, trusting his sister, took the bait. He signaled his fleet to hold back and sailed alone toward the designated island. The Argonauts watched as he disembarked, a proud prince walking to his doom. Jason, his sword hidden beneath his cloak, went to meet them. The crew of the Argo could only watch from the ship, a silent, horrified audience to a tragedy they had enabled. The ancient stories diverge on what happened next, each version more terrible than the last. Some say Jason leaped from the shadows of the island's temple and cut down the unarmed prince in a cowardly ambush, a brutal but simple act of murder. But the darker whispers, the ones told in hushed tones for centuries, tell a different tale. They say that Medea herself met her brother, that she embraced him, tears streaming down her face, and as he held her she gave a signal, and Jason struck. But the horror did not end there. In this darkest version of the myth, Medea, the sorceress, the priestess, the woman who had abandoned everything for love, committed an act so monstrous it would echo through eternity. To ensure her father's pursuit would be stopped for good, she and Jason did the unthinkable. They dismembered the body of her brother, Absyrtus. Then, as the Argo sailed away from that cursed island, with the Colchian fleet once again bearing down on them, they began to cast the pieces of the prince into the sea. An arm, a leg. One by one, the gruesome markers of their escape were tossed into the ship's wake. From his flagship, King Eats saw it. He saw what they were doing. He saw the remains of his only son, his heir, scattered across the waves. And he was broken. The pursuit, the fleece, the honor of his kingdom. It all vanished in a wave of unimaginable grief. The law of the gods and men demanded that a body be given a proper burial. To leave a son's remains for the fish was an impiety no king could bear. The Colchian fleet stopped. The war drums fell silent. The horns that had blared for vengeance now sounded a mournful dirge. Sailors lowered small boats into the water, their faces filled with horror and pity, as they began the grim task of collecting the scattered pieces of their murdered prince. The great chase was over. Aboard the Argo, there was no celebration. There was only a thick, suffocating silence. The Argonauts, heroes who had faced down clashing rocks and fire-breathing bulls, could not look at each other. They could not look at Jason, who stood stone-faced at the helm. And most of all, they could not look at Medea, who stared back at her father's grieving fleet, her face a blank canvas, her eyes as empty and cold as the sea itself. They had the Golden Fleece. They had their lives. But on that day, sailing away on a sea of blood and betrayal, they knew they had lost something far, far more valuable. They had lost their honor. And their journey home was now not just a voyage, but a curse. The journey home is never just about the miles. It's about what you carry with you. And the Argo was heavy, not with gold but with guilt. The sea itself seemed to reject them. The winds, once their allies, now tore at their sails like furies. Storms rose from calm waters, and the sun hid its face as if ashamed to look upon them. They were lost, adrift on an ocean that had become their accuser. Then from the very heart of the ship a voice spoke. Not a man, but the ship itself. A beam of sacred oak, taken from the whispering oracle of Dodona, groaned and spoke in a human tongue. It told them of Zeus's wrath. The king of the gods would not suffer a murderer to sail his seas. They were stained, the ship declared, and could not reach home until they were cleansed. And there was only one being in the world powerful enough, and strange enough, to wash away the blood of a kinsman. Circe the sorceress, Medea's own aunt. They sailed to her island, a place of unsettling beauty, where tamed lions and wolves with the eyes of men greeted them on the shore. Circe met them, a figure of immense and ancient power. She saw at once the darkness clinging to them. She saw the ghost of Absyrtus in their shadows. She performed the rites of purification, sacrificing a suckling pig and washing their hands in its blood, chanting to the gods of the underworld. The ritual cleansed their hands of the physical stain, but Circe's eyes told them the truth. No ritual could cleanse their souls. She sent them away, offering no hospitality, wanting nothing to do with the darkness they had brought to her shore. They were clean enough for the gods to let them travel, but they would never be clean again for themselves. Their path now led them towards the Sirens, those creatures whose song was a promise of oblivion, a melody so beautiful it lured sailors to their deaths on the rocks. As their fatal music drifted across the water, a new sound rose from the deck of the Argo. It was Orpheus, the master musician. He took up his lyre and he played. He didn't try to drown out the siren's song. He wove his own music around it, a melody not of death and forgetting, but of life, of struggle, of love, of the beauty of a sunset and the warmth of a home. His music spoke of the things worth living for, and it was a sound so pure, so powerful, that it broke the siren's spell. The Argonauts, tears streaming down their faces, rowed with all their might, their hearts filled not with a death wish, but with a desperate longing for life. They sailed past the rocks of despair, saved by the one thing they still had that was pure, art. But the trials were relentless. Next came the passage of Scylla and Charybdis, the monster and the whirlpool, a nightmare corridor of sea where death was guaranteed on one side or the other. Here no mortal skill could save them, but they had one ally left on Olympus. Hera, the queen of the gods, who had set this whole quest in motion, was not ready to see her champion fail. She sent the Nereids, the silver-footed nymphs of the sea, to guide them. Like dolphins of light they appeared, diving and leaping, pushing the Argo, lifting it on currents, and steering it through the heart of the passage, so close to the gnashing teeth of Scylla that they could smell her foul breath, so near the vortex of Charybdis that the ship spun like a leaf. They emerged, battered and terrified, into calm waters, having passed through the very jaws of death. Their relief was short-lived. On the horizon they saw sails. The Colchian fleet had found them. They took refuge on the island of the Phaeacians, ruled by the wise king Alcinous. The Colchians demanded Medea be returned to face justice for her treason and the murder of her brother. King Alcinous was trapped. He was bound by the sacred laws of hospitality to protect his guests, but also by law to return a fugitive. His wife, the clever Queen Arete, saw a way out. She went to Jason and Medea in secret and told them of the king's judgment. If Medea was still a virgin, she would be returned to her father. If she was a married woman, she belonged to her husband. That night, in a sacred cave, by the light of the Golden Fleece itself, Jason and Medea were wed. It was not a marriage of love, but of strategy. A desperate, hurried union to bind their fates together legally, just as they had already been bound by blood and betrayal. When the king gave his official verdict the next day, the Colchians were forced to retreat. Jason and Medea were now husband and wife. Their dark partnership was sealed. One final, brutal trial remained. A great storm, the last gasp of the gods' fury, lifted the Argo from the sea and threw it miles inland, stranding it in the burning sands of the Libyan desert. For 12 days and 12 nights, the heroes, their bodies scorched by the sun, their minds delirious with thirst, carried their great ship on their shoulders across the endless dunes. It was an act of pure penance. All the glory was gone, all the pride stripped away, leaving only the grit and agony of survival. They stumbled into the garden of the Hesperides, only to find they had just missed Hercules, who had been there, stolen the golden apples, and left a spring of fresh water in his wake. It was a bitter reminder of the hero they had lost, a man whose greatness they could no longer claim to share. Finally, after a journey that had aged them all a lifetime, they saw the familiar shores of Iolcus. They had done it. They had returned with the prize. But there were no cheering crowds. The city was quiet, somber. Jason marched to the palace, the golden fleece draped over his arms, a symbol of his impossible victory, and laid it at the feet of King Peleus. And Peleus laughed. He had never intended to give up the throne. In Jason's absence, he had grown more paranoid, more cruel. He had forced Jason's father to take his own life and driven his mother to suicide. The entire quest, the years of struggle, the friends lost, the crimes committed, it was all for nothing. The promise was a lie. Jason stood there broken. He had no army, no support. But he had Medea. And Medea's mind was a weapon sharper than any sword. She went into the city, not as a warrior but as a wise woman. She demonstrated her magic to the daughters of Peleus, taking an old ram, cutting it to pieces, and boiling it in a cauldron with magic herbs. From the pot sprang a young lamb. She promised the daughters she could do the same for their father, restore his youth. Blinded by love and foolish hope, they believed her. That night they crept into their father's chamber, and with their own hands they drugged him, dismembered him, and boiled his remains in a cauldron, waiting for a miracle that would never come. Medea had delivered Jason's revenge, a revenge so monstrous, so personal, that it poisoned the very air of Iolcus. But this act did not win them the throne. It horrified the people. Jason, the hero, was now seen as the consort of a monster. They were driven out, exiled from the very kingdom he had bled to claim. They wandered to Corinth, where for a decade, a fragile peace seemed to settle. They had 2 sons. The adventure was over. But Jason was restless. He was a hero with no kingdom, a king with no subjects, living in the shadow of his foreign sorceress wife. He saw one last chance for power. He arranged to marry the daughter of the king of Corinth, to cast Medea aside and secure his place in a royal line. He told Medea it was for the good of their sons, to give them a better future. But she saw it for what it was, the final ultimate betrayal. And that betrayal unleashed a grief and a rage that would make the gods themselves tremble. Medea, the woman who had sacrificed her home, her family, her very soul for Jason, was now to be discarded like a worn-out tool. Her revenge would not be against a king, but against Jason's entire world. She sent a poisoned gown to the new bride, a gift that burned the princess and her father to death in an agony of fire. Then, to complete her vengeance, to utterly destroy the man who had destroyed her, she committed the final unthinkable act. She took a knife to the 2 sons she shared with Jason, her own children. She killed them to erase his lineage, to ensure his name would die with him, to leave him utterly and completely alone in a world of his own making. The great hero Jason was left with nothing. His quest was a footnote, his prize a memory, his family a pile of corpses. He became a broken old man, who would wander back to the rotting hulk of the Argo, beached and forgotten. He would sit in its decaying shadow, remembering the glory, the promise, the man he once was. And one day as he slept, a rotted beam from the mast, perhaps the very same sacred beam that had once spoken to him, cracked, fell, and crushed him. An empty, silent, and pathetic end. The quest for the Golden Fleece was never a story about a hero winning a prize. It's a story about the prize being worthless. It's a warning that the line between a hero and a monster is razor thin, and that a dream pursued without honor will inevitably become a nightmare. Jason and the Argonauts got the gold, but they lost themselves. And generations later, we remember the story not for the fleece, but for the terrible eternal question it asks: what is the price of your dream, and who will have to pay for it?